welcome everybody to day 2 of Start Strong 2021. And we have our second speaker today, Dr. Jorge Armesto, a friend and a peer of mine, a psychotherapist down in Rhode Island, a teacher of mindful self-compassion, a practicing Buddhist in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. So many accolades that I could offer you. It's just a sweet human being. So thank you so much for being here to guide this workshop on mindful self-compassion. And I just want to let people know that this is being recorded. So if for some reason you don't want to be recorded, your voice or your likeness, please just go ahead and turn your video and your audio off. And Jorge, are you going to be sharing a presentation today?
No, so I'm going to be talking and exchanging ideas. So I don't have any, you mean any slides that I have? Or?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to spotlight you and invite you to take it away.
Okay. And I have a question. Is there a way, Shae, that I can see other people's? When you spotlight me, then the rest of you disappear. Is there a way that I can see other faces? Can you hear me?
I'm muted. So
I was going to say, if I talk, do you see me? Do I pop up?
No.
Oh.
It might be your view. Let me see.
Let me see. Yes. Let me see what
the gallery view.
Now I can see the person who's speaking, but oh, wait. I'm going to go.
Right. He should be able to change his view.
Yeah.
I got it.
Oh, yeah.
I just like seeing the human beings in front of me.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
So welcome and thank you for having me. And so we have a lot of information to cover for the next hour. But on the other hand, I want to mention from the get-go that please feel free to ask questions, to interrupt me. We will be doing some soft landing meditations and some exercises. But if I'm speaking and talking about certain concepts or sharing something technical and you have a question, please just say, I have a question, or unmute, and then feel free to interrupt me because I welcome that. So know that. So again, my name is Jorge Armesto, and I use he, him pronouns. And I'm very happy to be here with all of you and be part of this community. And Shae, thank you so much for organizing this. I know that this was a labor of love, so really appreciate that. And I'm speaking to you from Bristol, Rhode Island, the unceded land of the Narragansett Nation. And so a little bit about my background in 30 seconds. I'm a psychologist. I'm a teacher of mindfulness and mindful self-compassion, and I'm also a yoga therapist. And in all of these different roles, I think that one of the things that I have come to really appreciate, whether culturally, physically, or psychologically, we all have parts of ourselves that live in exile. And we often have no words for this legacy of disconnection. And yet the body knows. And the body speaks to us. The question is, are we listening? And I'll let you answer that question for yourself. I know that I am not listening. But more importantly then, are we listening? Are we listening in a tender way? So mindful self-compassion really helps us listen to ourselves tenderly and in a manner that helps us hold our suffering, build resiliency, and improve well-being. And so what I'm going to invite you today to explore with me is I'm going to offer you a little bit of a taste of the Mindful Self-Compassion course, which is an 8-week mindfulness-based intervention. And it is supported by extensive research. So, and I'm going to touch very briefly on that, but I can direct you to places where you can get more of the specifics of research, if that's something that your brain likes to do. So I'm going to offer you an introduction to MSC, and we will do a couple of practices. You will need a writing utensil and a piece of paper. So if you don't have that close by, take a moment to do that. And then the other thing I would like to invite you is to take a moment to stretch your body in any way that your body needs to move. Perhaps standing up or just a big stretch, side stretch in the chair. And as you as you stretch your body, just noticing what your body's saying. Is it a little cranky? Is it a little stiff? Is there a sense of ease? Perhaps both are present. I see Shae shaking it all the way. Thank you, Shae, for showing. And then we're going to sit together in what in mindful self-compassion we call a soft landing meditation. So we'll be sitting for a few minutes, and I'll be guiding you through this meditation. And please remember that every instruction is an invitation. And since in mindful self-compassion we are orienting towards taking care of ourselves, please determine what you need most. If there's an instruction that doesn't work for you, don't do it. Let it go. I might invite you to close your eyes, and you want to keep your eyes open, please offer that to yourself. So again, these are just serving suggestions. Take what works and then let go of the rest. So having said that, find yourself a comfortable seating posture. Notice your body here in space. Notice breath. And either hold a soft gaze or close your eyes, whatever feels right for you. And just the awareness that we have all arrived here at some expense and with some effort. And if we could take a moment to think of the many hands that were involved in opening the way for us to be here today. Hands that we know and hands that we don't know. And the following meditation is really inviting us to bring our hearts and minds into the present moment. So again, checking in with that internal landscape. And see if you need to readjust your body to make it even 5% more comfortable. Here we are orienting towards comfort. And begin to turn attention to the body that has carried you here and through this life. Bringing the body into your field of awareness. And then feeling for ease as much as possible. Feeling the support from the ground, the chair. Aware of your spine supporting you. And then moving awareness to your breath. And if the breath is an anchor that does not work for you, then find an anchor in your body that works, perhaps the palms of your hands or the soles of your feet. And taking a few nice deep breaths. And all of you are muted, so feel free to let out any sound that feels right, that your body needs to make. Perhaps a nice big sigh. And then simply listening to the sounds in the room where you are. Just sitting in the midst of those sounds. Letting them come to you. Some of the sounds will be coming from the outside and some from the inside. And now in your mind's eye, finding your own body in the room. Welcome yourself into the room as if you're seeing a long lost friend. Or greet yourself with an inner smile, a welcoming smile. Perhaps even inclining towards yourself as you might toward a loved one. And now drop your awareness into the physical sensations in the body as they come and go. Pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Particularly noticing any uneasiness in your mind or body. And seeing if you can let your heart soften a little bit, because this is so. Now taking a moment to appreciate the efforts and good intentions that brought you here. This is already an act of compassion or self-compassion. And when you're ready, gently opening your eyes, coming back to the larger room. Taking a moment to take in the faces in front of you. So a little bit of reflection on this brief meditation. All that we learn in the 8-week mindful self-compassion was contained in that meditation. And these are simple, but not easy skills to really come to fully embodied. So it's a practice. It's an ongoing practice. And what are these skills? First of all, stopping. The invitation is to stop and be in your body. How often do we do this in life? It's so much easier to speed up than to slow down. So the invitation in mindful self-compassion is to first stop. Because in order to take care of our suffering, we need to know that we're suffering. And in order to suffer, we need to stop. And then the other skill is seeing what arises, or mindfulness. So turning into the body and noticing what's happening in the body. And with the body, I mean the body, the heart, and the mind. And then the third element is responding to discomfort with kindness. Not to make it go away, but because we are suffering, can we offer ourselves some kindness? A quote that we like to use that really captures this is by the Persian poet Rumi, who said, "Close your eyes, fall in love, stay there." And again, when we do that, we also encounter other parts of ourselves that creep up, and MSCs such as the inner critic. Anybody familiar with the inner critic? Mine is really big and it's always here.
We have a whole workshop coming up Sunday on that, actually.
Oh, great. So that's part. How do we befriend the inner critic and work with that part of ourselves? So MSC is designed to make mindfulness and self-compassion a felt experience. To start to internalize these practices in our bones little by little. So let's explore that. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions or anything like you want to make sure that I cover or mention? So I can keep that in mind. Okay, if that comes up for you, you can put it in the chat, and if I miss it, Shae, you can remind me, because then I just get very excited and then I just focus. So we're gonna do a written reflection exercise if you wish to do so. So I'm gonna invite you to have a pen and a piece of paper. And once you have it, I'm gonna invite you to take a moment to close your eyes again. And turn the gaze inward, allowing a few deep in-breath and slow out breaths. And take a moment to think about the various times in which you have had a close friend who was suffering in some way. Perhaps this friend had a misfortune, failed at something they really wanted to accomplish, or they just had a general sense of feeling inadequate. How do you typically respond to your friends in such situations? What do you say? Not only what do you say, but what tone do you use? And if you can imagine yourself in a particular situation, how is your posture? What do you convey to them non-verbally? And take a moment to write down what comes to you in this situation, in offering comfort to a friend that's suffering. How do you respond to them? Jotting down a few words that capture this. And perhaps you have more to say, but we're going to take a moment to move on, being mindful of the time. We will usually spend a little bit more time, but I'm giving you a little taste. But I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or hold a soft gaze again. And consider the next question. Think about the various times in which you were suffering in some way. You had a misfortune. You failed at something you really wanted to do. You felt inadequate or unworthy. How do you typically respond to yourself in these situations? What do you say? What tone do you use? And how is your posture? Taking a moment to bring this picture into your mind's eye and then write down what comes up for you. How do you treat yourself when you're suffering? So this is where I would send you off to breakout rooms and have a time to talk, but maybe we can do this in this group and just checking in, whoever would like to share, what did you discover? What did you notice? The ways in which you treat a friend who is suffering, the ways that you treat yourself when you're suffering. What came up for you?
Well, I'll be happy to
Good.
throw myself.
Okay.
Which I'm sure may or may not come as a surprise, but definitely the container to hold space for somebody else who is suffering is very easy, whereas the container to hold space for myself is challenging if I'm not in the right mindset. You know, it's easier for me to be like, oh, you did that wrong, you know, rather than immediately defaulting to compassion. It's a default to error or judgment or, you know, so yeah.
So that sense of easier for others, harder for myself.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you, Shae. Gail, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, and I would say, probably the same thing, Shay. When I wrote down, I hold space, I listen, I ask, how can I help you? Right? Is there anything I can do to make it better? And I don't say that to myself. I allow myself to feel small. Yeah.
May I ask a follow-up question to that, Gail?
Sure.
When you say that you allow yourself to feel small, where does that show up for you in your body?
It hasn't for a long time. Okay. It in the past, it showed up when I was trying to do something for someone else and it failed. Right. So I felt like I wasn't good enough. I don't feel that way anymore.
Okay.
Right. So.
And that's a great awareness, right? That that has shifted for you.
Right.
And it might show up again, right? And
Oh yeah.
we're humans.
Right.
Part of what we work in mindful self-compassion is to work with being kind to ourselves in the same way that we're kind to others, which is
Right.
Anybody else? Teresa.
Well, this was actually kind of easy because I had just done a similar exercise myself this morning. I've been doing some of Deb, I forget her last names, Vegas, then so funny, I'm all of a sudden tongue-tied. Stephen Porges's work with ventral vagal, dorsal vagal, and sympathetic. And the exercise that I did, which was a taped one, was to imagine just what you said and come up with responses that would be typical of me using each of those systems. And so, because I do use all three. So when I'm in that shutdown dorsal vagal, I literally get into bed and crawl up like a cocoon. And just kind of stay there for a long time. When I get a little bit more energy, I'll seek out help from a friend or somebody. And then when I can access that, ventral vagal state, I spend time right here in my yoga room. And it could be meditation or yoga or spiritual reading. But those are, so being able to spend time in the yoga room is probably the most beneficial, although seeking help from a friend is helpful too.
Okay, but what I'm hearing from you is the way that you resource yourself, depending on where you are, and the awareness of that.
Yeah.
But in order to seek the yoga room or seek a friend, you need to be aware that you are suffering.
Right. I have to get out of bed curled up with the blankets on top of me. Exactly. Yeah. That's always the hard part.
I know. Anybody else would like to share anything related to this exercise? So what we know about the way that we are critical to ourselves is that most of us, some of the research data suggests that 78% of the general population in the United States are more compassionate towards others than themselves. And it's only about 6% that are more compassionate with themselves than others. So most of us struggle with this. The good news is that it's a skill, and we can learn to be more self-compassionate. I will have it. I don't find it. Oh, here it is. I'm going to try to put this in the chat. Let me see if I can do that. This is a scale. This is the self-compassion scale that Dr. Kristen Neff uses. And you can go to her website and take the scale and see where you are. And it's probably the most widely used scale to assess our state self-compassion. And it's interesting. We invite people to take it before they take a self-compassion class, and then afterwards, and see if they notice any changes in the scale. So there's her website. Her website also has a lot of research and a lot of annotated bibliography on self-compassion. It's really a great website.
Jorge, I actually have the workbook.
Yeah.
I couldn't take your class this spring, but I noticed you guys use this workbook, so I'm excited.
Yeah, great. That's a great resource. So what is self-compassion? So the informal definition of self-compassion is treating yourself with the same kindness and care as you would treat a close friend. So that's it. That's the general definition. More technically, self-compassion as a definition includes 3 parts. One of it is mindfulness. That's why it's called mindful self-compassion, mindfulness. And basically, in order to respond to suffering with compassion, we first have to know that we're suffering. So what mindfulness does, and the practice of mindfulness, is help us turn our attention toward painful feelings and be with them, as opposed to being fused by them or swept away by them. So when we become really fused with our feelings or we're swept away by them, we call this over-identification. And that's the opposite of mindfulness. So I like to think of mindfulness as the pebble in the roaring river, staying there, solid, while the waters are rushing through. So, and this is key. It may seem really obvious, but it's not that easy. When we are suffering, when we have strong emotions, we tend to be swept away by those emotions, or by that inner critic showing up and beating us up more, because that's like adding insult on top of insult. And so mindfulness is a balanced state of awareness. In mindfulness, we don't suppress what we're feeling. It's not about feeling good. There's a lot out there on mindfulness and meditation that it's about feeling good. And that's not really accurate. Mindfulness is about feeling what you're feeling in the moment, but in a balanced way, without suppressing or avoiding. So one of the things that we often do, I don't know about you, but we get carried by the storyline of what's happening. Oh, she said, and he did, and I can believe, and and we just roll with it. And we believe it. We believe what we think. This is part of the problem. And if you start to attend to your thoughts, you realize that we're churning the same thoughts throughout the day, a little bit of a different version of them. And we all have our own flavor of thoughts that we churn over and over again. And mindfulness allows us to notice that, so we can stop and have a little bit more space to respond instead of reacting. So how do we cultivate mindfulness? Well, we must first slow down. And one of the reasons that we always invite in mindfulness is working with the body, is that the timing of the body is always slower. When we enter the body, things start to slow down. Our minds are always going very fast. So the invitation is to first befriend the body and ground in the body to slow down. So any questions so far? I'm going to be aware of the time. Okay. So the other, yes, Teresa, go ahead.
You don't have to answer this now, Jorge, but something popped into my mind when you were speaking.
Yeah.
And that's that at the school that I work in, there's a mindfulness program, but sometimes it feels to many people that it's almost like, what did I write the word? Positivity overload, which is not what mindfulness is meant to be. So at some point, could you speak on that?
Yes,
Thanks.
I'm making a note. So the other part of the definition of mindful self-compassion, the first one is mindfulness versus over-identification. The second part is self-kindness. So with self-compassion, again, we treat ourselves with kindness, care, and understanding. And the research is pretty unequivocal about this. We treat ourselves much more harshly than we treat others. We say things to ourselves that we wouldn't say to others, not if we want to stay in connection with them, right? So at the heart of compassion is the concern with the alleviation of suffering and the motivation to do something about it. So compassion is, we like to say that compassion is an active verb. It involves comforting, protecting, and supporting ourselves when we're in pain. And the third element, well, and the opposite of self-kindness is self-judgment, that inner critic. And then the third element is common humanity. This is my favorite part of the definition because it's a reminder that our experience of imperfection is part of what it means to be a human. And evolution has gifted us with an organism that really is inclined to, we're inclined towards scanning the environment, our external, internal landscapes to see what's wrong. That's what we call the negativity bias. And our survival has depended on it, to look for patterns that are not supposed to belong, and it's just to protect us. But what has happened is that we turn that scanning of what's wrong internally, and that's when we start beating. And so we start, instead of worry about the saber-toothed tiger in the savannah, we start attacking our self-concept. In common humanity, we really are reminded that we, like everybody else in the world, suffers, and that this is part of what it means to be a human, and this is part of the human experience. And I want to say, a lot of times people get tripped by this. They say, wait a minute, suffering, well, they're suffering and then they're suffering. And again, we don't want to diminish the fact that some of us experience really particular kinds of suffering related to the intersection of their identities. When we say common humanity is a way to understand more deeply that human condition, and it's not about comparing suffering. It's simply acknowledging that we all suffer. We suffer in unique ways, but the fact that we all suffer is what we mean by common humanity. And with that reminder, when we are suffering, when we're in a lot of pain, we often tend to isolate. And the reminder of common humanity is a way to know that we're not alone. That everyone, including ourselves, live imperfect lives. And finally, I want to mention something about the two sides of compassion, because a lot of people think that compassion is this soft emotion and, soft voice, and that's true. There's that to compassion. But compassion, in mindful self-compassion, we speak about the yin and the yang of compassion. And the yin of compassion is being with our pain, comforting, soothing, reassuring, and validating. But there is the yang of compassion, and that's acting in the world. That's the force that helps us protect, provide, and motivate. And we need both. These are two essential ways of caring. So in MSC, we include both, but initially we focus more on the yin because we need to nourish ourselves before we can step into the world with courage and strength, which is the yang of compassion. A very well-known meditation teacher, John Halifax, says, strong back, soft front. And that's part of what we're cultivating. Any questions? Thoughts, comments?
Well, I was going to share something.
Okay.
Because the self-compassion piece, well, I think self-compassion, as you said, because so many people struggle with this, it's not something we're really taught as children. It's not our default behavior. So it has really been a struggle for me. And a couple, 7 years ago now, my first niece was born. And so my name became Shae. And in the last couple of years, I've actually, when I start to notice myself not being that compassionate person, I call myself Shae. And it's almost like this switch that reminds me, and maybe it's getting into like the internal family systems way of looking at yourself a little bit, but it just reminds me like, oh no, there's this other person here that needs compassion. It's just been a fun little thing that I feel silly every time I do it, but it really works. Just to think of myself as this other being. And it's just, I don't know. I think I might have shared that yesterday, but it's so effective for me.
I love that, Shae, and just your body language talking about it, it's joyful. And basically your niece, who calls you Shae, which I love, she's a benefactor. You're calling on a benefactor, somebody who sees you in a loving way and who speaks to you and thinks of you as a source of connection and love. And when you invoke her and invoke the way she addresses, it's invoking, she's a benefactor. And that's one way to resource ourselves with the people in our lives that are helping us and that love us in very special ways, and to access that sense of like, okay, I got this. Shae got this. So thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to talk very briefly a little bit about the misgivings about self-compassion, because a lot of people say, oh, self-compassion, and they start to worry. What do you think it's one of the challenges when people hear self-compassion? What do you think people worry about? If I am more self-compassionate, I am going to
Be selfish.
Be selfish. Great. That is really one of them. What else?
Well, we are. That is being selfish, but that's a good thing.
Not dealing with your problems.
Not dealing with your problems. Who said, but we are, and that's a good thing? That was you. Okay. What else? Not dealing with your problems. I'm not gonna deal with my problems. I'm just gonna pretend they're not there. What else?
Feeling sorry for ourselves. Just feeling sorry for ourselves.
Feeling sorry for ourselves. I know. Pity, feeling pity.
Mm-hmm.
All very common misgivings. And we're going to touch very briefly on them in the class. We expand a little bit more on it. But the number one concern is that self-compassion will undermine motivation. Mm-hmm. So people think that it will take away their edge or their motivation to do things. And because most people believe that self-criticism is an effective motivator. Yeah, don't be weak. You can do this. Just do it. Get over it.
Be strong.
Be strong. But what we know from research is actually the opposite, that self-compassion decreases the fear of failure and increases personal responsibility and motivation to repair mistakes. So people who score higher on self-compassion are more likely to take risks and are more likely to try it again after they have failed. And what we know about self-criticism from the research is that it undermines self-confidence and leads to fears of failure. And therefore, it undermines motivation. The other big one is self-compassion is weak. And what I can say about that is that self-compassion, and the research is also pretty clear about this, is that self-compassion is linked to coping and resiliency. So the most important aspect of self-compassion is that helps us learn how to relate to ourselves when things get difficult. And that is inner resiliency, which I don't know about you, but the more inner resilient one is, the stronger one is. But we still think it's weak. So the question we ask people on self-compassion, you don't need to answer this out loud, but to yourself, are you an inner enemy or an inner ally? And in self-compassion, we're working on being an inner ally. The website that I put in the link, it's has over 1,500 research articles. Probably now it's a lot more than that, on self-compassion. And Kristen Neff has annotated bibliography on it, and it's great. You can download a lot of the articles and the bibliographies by different topics of self-compassion. So something to explore. And briefly, I want to be mindful of the time. Where am I? Okay.
Yeah, you still have about 20 minutes almost, and I'd love to have some time for questions.
Sure. So briefly, I wanted to mention that the roots of self-compassion are in our attachment system. So our attachment to care providers. So what we know is that self-compassion is one of the most effective ways to repair early difficult experiences by reparenting ourselves. And since compassion can be learned, that's great news. So, and finally, a few things about self-compassion and self-esteem, because that's the big thing. And I personally, this is my bias, I really don't like the concept of self-esteem or self-esteem as the way that it's taught in schools and in kids. So self-esteem can be really defined as a global evaluation of self-worth. So we judge ourselves as being good or being bad, being competent or incompetent. And it's based on comparisons. And it's always tends to be contingent on success. I feel good if I succeeded at this. I feel badly and I'm a failure if I wasn't as good. And I wasn't as good as Johnny or as Mary. And self-compassion doesn't entail evaluations. It simply entails relating to ourselves kindly, especially when we fail or when we notice a shortcoming. Self-compassion fosters connection versus comparison and sees our suffering as part of the human experience. I'm going to stop there with that. I would discuss a little bit about the body's threat defense system, the fight, flight, or freeze, and how that gets activated by self-criticism. Some of the work of Paul Gilbert, but I'll just mention it in passing because of the time. Any questions so far, or we can move to the next activity? We're gonna do 2 informal practices.
The only thing I was going to say, Jorge, was something we talked about, reflecting on something we talked about with Michael Lee yesterday about the aspect of unconditional positive regard from Carl Rogers, and that this has some of that same energy, that's unconditional positive regard for self, and how powerful that is. I know that's what we're doing as yoga therapists, trying to bring that into our sessions with people. And
yeah, and I appreciate you say that, but people hear the word positive and think that it needs to be what they consider good. Mm-hmm. Unconditional positive regard is learning how to be with our experience as it's unfolding, with all of it. That which we think it's difficult, that which we can celebrate, but with all of it. And some people think, oh, positive, I can't feel anger, I can't feel like a sense I'm feeling like a failure. Well, that's not unconditional positive regard. If you hold that with spaciousness and with kindness, that's unconditional positive regard. So it's not about getting rid of anything. It's about holding everything that's happening more spaciously. So thank you. That's and it does relate. It's a little bit of a different way to look at the same thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to invite you. Okay, we're going to do a brief exercise. We're going to do 2 brief informal practices that are part of the Mindful Self-Compassion curriculum. So for this one, if you are able and willing, I'm going to invite you to stand up just to stretch your body. We've been sitting for a little bit. Offer your body any stretch that it needs. So I'm gonna lead you through some an exercise. One of the main ways that we activate compassion, there are two universal triggers to compassion. One of them is soothing touch, and the other one is gentle vocalization. And this is built into our system. And that's why, notice how parents speak to babies and how parents hold newborns, and how our body responds to touch. So we all need this. Our survival depends on touch, and also on gentle vocalizations. So we practice that in mindful self-compassion. So we're going to practice some soothing touch. So I want to invite you to find, bring your legs hip width apart, find a solid sense of balance, soft knees. Close your eyes or hold a soft gaze, whatever is available to you. And just simply place one hand holding the other. And just notice this. Notice how this feels. And even invite a little squeeze. Well, how does you receive this pressure from one hand to the other? And now begin rubbing your hands. And notice the rubbing, perhaps even the sound and the sensation. Just see how this feels. And now bringing one hand over your heart. Notice your body here. Notice your hand making contact with your heart area. Invite the other hand on top if it's not already there. And notice this. With the hand closest to your heart, make a fist. And then bring the other hand cupping the fist. And notice how this feels. Move one hand to your abdominal area and the other one on your heart area, and notice this. And explore some pressure, just gentle pressure. And bringing both hands to your abdominal area. And explore cradling your face with your hands and notice the sensations here. And gently squeezing your arms, each arm starting from your shoulder area, and just moving and squeezing your arms. And then releasing your posture and coming back to your seat, finding a comfortable seated posture. While still holding an internal gaze. Close eyes or soft gaze, whatever. And while you're in your chair here, start rocking a little bit from side to side and notice how this feels, or from front to back. Perhaps you notice my body moving at some points during this is something I naturally just do. I do a lot of rocking. It's another form of soothing, primal movement. And so now we're going to do a very brief version of what we call the self-compassion break. So keeping your eyes closed, bring to mind a situation in your life right now that is difficult, that is causing you some stress, but not a lot of stress. It could be a relationship problem, a work problem, or perhaps you have a friend that is struggling. I'm going to invite you to choose a problem that's in the mild to moderate range, not a big problem. And in my experience, I always have lots of overachievers and they go for the 10. Don't go for the 10. We want a 2 or 3. Because we don't want to go to overwhelm. And if you have identified the problem, mild to moderate problem, allow yourself to see, hear, and feel your way into the problem. To the extent that you start experiencing some uneasiness in your body. And notice where you're feeling that sense of uneasiness most. Just making contact with the discomfort that you feel in your body. And then saying to yourself slowly and kindly, this is a moment of suffering. This is a moment of suffering. That's mindfulness. Aware that you're suffering. You could also say to yourself, this hurts, or ouch, or this is stressful, or perhaps this is tough. Anything that feels authentic to you. And now coming back to your body and noticing where you feel the discomfort now. Saying to yourself, suffering is part of living. Suffering is part of living. This is common humanity. Other questions include saying to yourself, I'm not alone, others are just like me. Or we all struggle in our lives. Any words that offer a recognition that we all suffer. And we're not comparing the suffering, we're just recognizing it. And now put your hands over your heart or wherever feels soothing. Feeling the contact of your hand with your heart area or another part of your body. Repeating the following words. May I be kind to myself. That's self-kindness. Other options include such things as, may I give myself what I need? Or may I live in love? May I accept myself as I am? Or may I begin to accept myself? And if you're having difficulties finding the right words, imagine that a dear friend or loved one is having the same problem as you. What would you say to this person heart to heart? And if your friend were to hold just a few of your words in their mind, what would you like them to be? What message would you like to deliver? And now, can you offer that same message to yourself? Now, slowly opening your eyes, just settling here. Anything that you notice, anything you would like to share, or opening up any other questions? And I'm still holding your question, Teresa. So anything that you noticed during this?
Well, I know I've been talking a lot, but I think just the what I noticed in my body was just how quick I became more expansive. You know, there was the contraction, which would be easy to dwell in, but once you shift, I just know, you know, it just expanded. It just changed so rapidly. So it's that physiological connection, that somatic, that's happening through that experience.
When did you notice the shift? When you?
It's in my belly. There's a specific part in my belly that I can tell just below the belly button, and it's just like this lightning rod that goes through me. And so it was happening, and then it just eased, and it was just so quick. So that's what I noticed.
Thank you, Shae. And this we did this longer, but this self-compassion break can literally be done in 30 seconds. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Sue, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, I appreciated that you reminded us to choose a smaller versus a larger issue, because there was some recognition that even those things, you know, the one I chose is my daughter's going to come and stay here overnight. She's bringing her dog that's incontinent, you know, like, okay, I wasn't really thinking that that was bothering me that much, but then I did notice the, you know, the tension. And it was in my arms. It was places that I wouldn't have really thought that I would experience that type of anxiety. Yeah, so it was really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. So did you, when you offer yourself some comforting words, did you notice anything change? And maybe you did, and maybe you didn't. That's fine.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, just that, yeah, it's powerful. And again, the reminder that it doesn't take that long and that we can do that is just a really great tool.
And for those of you who work with clients, and they're coming, and for those of you who are healers in the healing professions, and you have a client that's suffering a lot, and it's bumping into our suffering, because that happens, of course, you can say those words while it's happening, while your client is there, and it would allow you to start to open up more to the person, less contraction, as Shae was mentioning. So it's a really cool little tool in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just think that, yes, this work is so powerful. So I'm a nurse. You know, my last role was as a behavioral health nurse, visiting patients and working with healthcare providers. They would be very distressed. We get consultations to have one-on-ones with patients because the patient was crying, you know, and the patient had just gotten, you know, really bad news. But you know, there was so much discomfort with that suffering. I think that's the point that I really took home, like how uncomfortable we are in our culture with suffering. So I think it's such a powerful message that you're giving.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate you saying that. And I think, Teresa, this connects to your question. Your question about the curriculum at the schools that tend to be really mindfulness curriculums, but tend to be very positively involved. And it's not, and of course, when we work with kids, we bring mindfulness in a different way. And we want to do it obviously in a way that holds their attention, that can be joyful, because mindfulness, you know, when we orient mindfulness towards things that are joyful, we call that savoring, right? And so savoring, and that's a good thing. We get to savor too. What happens in the larger culture is, and from my perspective, is that there is a lot of emphasis on feeling good. You should be happy. You should feel good. And I always question now, what does that really mean to be happy and to feel good? Because these are not like places we arrive and we stay at. These are all places that this moves all the time. We have, I mean, my wish for all of you is that you experience a lot of ease and moments of joy, but part of this process is the other side of it. We cannot know joy unless we know sadness. We cannot fully know ease unless we are, feeling unease. So staying away from good, bad, and the orientation is to try to hold it. And my hope is that some of these programs do this, but I'm aware that with kids, we need to stay in the play, in that kind of space to be able to have them access that. I don't know if that answered your question, Teresa.
Yeah, I know that we're probably out of time, but yeah, I'm finding, especially in these pandemic times in school, it's more of an issue because, for obvious reasons, there's more suffering going on. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's finding that balance of giving them resources, but honoring what they're feeling, all at a time when they don't have time to communicate. It's hard.
Yeah, and how we as providers and teachers, and as Sue was mentioning, how can we, the most important practice is be and try to understand and learn how to be with your suffering, because then when you are with others who are suffering, you're going to be able to provide a much, much expansive holding space for them. And that in and of itself is healing. And I'm aware of the time, so.
The last thing I was going to say, which I think is a really valuable practice, is just being able to name it. I think sometimes we're grasping for emotions, or if we hadn't had that experience of emotion, it's just, so we just name it. And I think that's such a valuable practice. So.
In MSC, we have these sayings we use: if you can name it, you can tame it. And if you can feel it, you can heal it.
That's beautiful.
So, and that's really just naming when we're feeling, sometimes it's hard because we're feeling so many things, but just the act of naming serves to start down-regulate our nervous system. And it starts to offer some sense of relief. But in order to name it, we need to slow down to know that what's happening. And I think, Sue, you offer a really great example of that, right? You thought that there was a little bit of distress that your daughter's bringing the incontinent dog home, but when you slow down and really were with it for it was like 4 minutes, you noticed, oh, it's a little more stressful than I think it was, right? And you had that awareness. And this happens all the time to all of us. And now you can enter that space when your daughter comes, hopefully with a little bit more understanding of what's going on with you and comforting you. And it might be a more spacious experience. It may not be. The dog might be doing what they do everywhere, and that will bring stuff. But if that happens, name it and try to offer kindness to yourself. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. I just want to honor you and say thank you to you for offering your time here to offer what I think is just a beautiful subject, something that can really enrich our human experience and ripple out into the world around us. So
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
grateful for you.
Thank you for being here, and much peace and ease to all of you.